The untamable beast. Commander Thane stood behind reinforced transparasteel, watching the aftermath of another training disaster. Smoke drifted from damaged equipment while medical teams carried injured cadets to the infirmary. In the center of the destruction stood Razeketh, a towering figure of muscle and natural armor, his 6 arms crossed in defiance. The Vorthak species had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most feared warriors. Standing 4 meters tall with chitinous exoskeletons that could deflect energy blasts, they possessed reflexes that made them nearly impossible to defeat in combat. Their homeworld of Vorth Prime was a death trap where only the strongest survived, and Razeketh had been the strongest of them all. That was exactly the problem. Cadet Razeketh. Thane's voice echoed through the intercom system. Report to containment immediately. The massive alien turned toward the observation deck, his 4 yellow eyes focusing on the commander. When he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. I do not take orders from prey species. Thane's blue-scaled skin darkened with frustration. As a Zerethi, he had commanded respect across 17 different military campaigns. His species had evolved sophisticated diplomatic skills that allowed them to manage the most diverse military forces in galactic history. Yet in 3 months of dealing with Razeketh, every technique had failed. Sir, Lieutenant Vex-9 approached, her mechanical limbs clicking against the deck plating. The medical report shows 12 injured cadets this time. 3 require surgery. Injuries from what? Thane asked, though he already knew the answer. Training exercises. Razeketh refuses to acknowledge the concept of practice combat. He treats every engagement as a life-or-death battle. Through the transparasteel, they watched as Razeketh began examining the damaged training equipment with casual interest. He picked up a twisted metal beam that had taken 6 cadets to lift, bending it into shapes as if it were clay. He's not malicious, Thane muttered. That's what makes this so difficult. Sir, malicious behavior we can punish, but Razeketh genuinely doesn't understand why we want him to hold back. On Vorth Prime, showing mercy means death. Every interaction is a test of dominance. The Vorthak's homeworld was legendary among xenobiologists, a planet where the weather could kill, the plants were carnivorous, and the animals hunted in packs that could take down starships. Survivors didn't learn cooperation. They learned to be apex predators. We could transfer him to a penal colony, Vex-9 suggested hesitantly. The Galactic Council specifically requested his training. They believe integrating Vorthak warriors into our forces could tip the balance in the Outer Rim conflicts. Thane's mandibles clicked with stress. But if we can't solve this problem in the next week, they'll pull the funding for the entire Xeno-integration program. A chime from the communication system interrupted their conversation. Commander Thane to the docking bay. Your consultation specialist has arrived. Thane's confusion was evident. I didn't request any specialists. Priority authorization from High Command, sir. Dr. Elena Vasquez, human behavioral expert. 20 minutes later, Thane stood in the docking bay watching a small human woman disembark from a transport shuttle. Dr. Elena Vasquez was unremarkable by human standards. Average height, brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing simple civilian clothes instead of a military uniform. She carried a standard travel bag and something that made Thane's translator struggle. Pet carrier, he asked, reading the display. Research assistant, Elena corrected with a smile. Commander Thane, I presume. I've read your reports on the Razeketh situation. You believe you can succeed where our best military psychologists have failed. Elena set down the carrier, and Thane heard something moving inside. Commander, may I ask what methods you've tried? Intimidation tactics, discipline protocols, isolation therapy, reward systems, combat challenges from our strongest warriors, psychological conditioning. All approaches designed for species that evolved in groups. Elena interrupted. Tell me about Vorth Prime. As they walked toward the command center, Thane explained the harsh realities of the Vorthak homeworld. Alina listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a handheld device. "Fascinating," she said when he finished. "You've been trying to teach an apex predator to be a pack animal. That's like trying to teach a star to orbit a planet. Then you agree the situation is hopeless." "Not hopeless, just misunderstood." Alina shifted the carrier to her other hand. "Commander, every species has natural behaviors that seem strange to others. Humans are no exception. But sometimes those strange behaviors are exactly what you need." They entered the command center where Vex 9 was monitoring Razeketh's location. The Vorthak had claimed the largest training facility as his territory and refused to leave. "There," Alina pointed at the screen. "Look at his posture." Thane studied the image. Razeketh stood in the center of the room, slowly rotating to keep all entrances in his peripheral vision. His 6 arms were positioned for maximum combat readiness. "He's not being aggressive," Alina continued. "He's being vigilant. On his homeworld, letting your guard down for even a moment meant death. He literally doesn't know how to relax." "So how do we teach him?" Alina smiled and set down the carrier. "We don't teach him to relax. We teach him that he's not the apex predator anymore." Before Thane could ask what she meant, Alina opened the carrier. What emerged defied every expectation. The commander had developed about human research assistants. A small orange creature with 4 legs and a long tail stretched lazily, then began grooming itself with a pink tongue. It was perhaps 1/10 the size of a typical humanoid, covered in fur that looked almost decorative. "This is Muffin," Alina said proudly. "My research partner." Thane's translator worked overtime trying to process the concept. "That is a predator. Earth's most efficient hunting machine," Alina confirmed. 95% success rate. Kills for sport rather than just survival, and possesses reflexes that allow them to react to threats faster than most species can perceive them. Muffin finished grooming and fixed Thane with a stare that made the commander suddenly uncomfortable. Despite the creature's small size, something in those green eyes suggested an intelligence that was calculating and utterly without mercy. "You want to introduce this creature to Razeketh. I want to show Razeketh what a real predator looks like," Alina said. "On Earth, humans aren't the apex predators. We just learn to cooperate with the ones that are." As if understanding the conversation, Muffin began walking toward the door that led to the training facilities. His movement was completely silent, each step placed with precision that spoke of a hunter's instincts. "Commander," Alina said, picking up her equipment. "On Vorth Prime, Razeketh was the most dangerous thing alive. But Muffin has been the most dangerous thing in my apartment for 3 years, and he's learned to coexist with creatures that bring him food and clean his bathroom. You're saying this small creature can teach discipline to our problem cadet?" Alina grinned. "I'm saying Muffin is about to show Razeketh that there's a difference between being strong and being in control." They followed Muffin toward the training facility, Thane's skepticism warring with desperate hope. Behind them, Vex 9 quietly activated every security camera in the academy. As they approached the training facility doors, Muffin's entire demeanor changed. His casual walk became a predator's stalk. His tail began twitching with focus. His ears swiveled forward, tracking sounds beyond the range of the other species' hearing. "Alina," Thane said quietly, "are you certain this is safe?" "For Muffin? Absolutely." Alina's smile was confident. "For Razeketh's ego, that's another story entirely." The doors to the training facility slid open, and Muffin padded inside with the confidence of an apex predator entering his domain. Behind him, 3 representatives of advanced galactic civilizations held their breath and waited to see what would happen when 2 very different kinds of hunters met for the first time. The predator's dilemma. Razeketh sensed the intrusion immediately. His 4 eyes tracked the movement of 3 figures entering his claimed territory. 2 he recognized as the Academy personnel who had been trying to control him, and 1 new creature that registered as barely worth noticing. Until the small creature moved. The orange thing that had entered with the humans walked with a fluidity that triggered recognition deep in Keth's evolutionary memory. This was not the clumsy movement of prey species or the calculated steps of competing predators. This was something else entirely, something that moved like death itself. Muffin ignored the towering alien completely, instead beginning to explore the training facility with casual interest. He sniffed at damaged equipment, investigated corners where shadows gathered, and eventually found a sunny patch near the viewport where he settled down to continue his grooming routine. Keth, Elena called out, her voice carrying across the facility. I'd like you to meet Muffin. The Vorthak's massive head turned toward the human. You bring me prey as a gift. I am not hungry. Muffin isn't prey, Elena replied calmly. He's the most successful predator on his home planet. Keth's laughter rumbled through the facility like an avalanche. That tiny creature. I could crush it without thinking. Could you? Elena asked. Why don't you try? The challenge hung in the air between them. Keth had never backed down from a challenge, regardless of how absurd it seemed. He began walking toward the small creature, his 6 arms flexing with anticipation of an easy victory. Muffin continued grooming, apparently oblivious to the approaching giant. Keth raised one of his massive hands, preparing to demonstrate the laughable mismatch between them. As he began to bring it down toward Muffin, the cat's head turned slightly in his direction. The movement was minimal, just a casual glance that lasted perhaps half a second. But something in that look made Keth freeze completely. Every instinct that had kept him alive on Vorth Prime suddenly screamed warnings. This was not prey. This was not a competitor. This was something that looked at him and saw food. Muffin returned to his grooming as if nothing had happened. Interesting, Elena said from across the room. Muffin seems to have classified you as not immediately threatening. That's actually quite a compliment from him. Keth remained frozen, his hand still raised above the small creature. His mind raced to process what had just occurred. In that brief moment of eye contact, he had seen something that defied everything he understood about predator hierarchies. What is that thing? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A house cat, Elena replied. On Earth, they're companions to humans. But before that, they were apex predators who shaped entire ecosystems through their hunting efficiency. Muffin stood up, stretched with the lazy confidence of someone who owned the world, and began walking around the training facility. His path was seemingly random, but Keth noticed that the creature was systematically investigating every corner, every hiding place, every possible route of escape or attack. He's mapping the territory, Elena explained, watching Keth's growing unease. It's instinctive behavior. Muffin needs to understand every aspect of his environment before he can be comfortable in it. Why does he move like that? Like what? Like he's hunting everything at once. Elena smiled. Because he is. Muffin's ancestors survived by being constantly aware of every potential threat and opportunity in their environment. They couldn't afford to relax, because something bigger might come along at any moment. Keth's 4 eyes tracked Muffin's movement around the facility. The small creature moved with absolute silence, placing each paw with precision that spoke of perfect balance and readiness to explode into action. When Muffin paused to investigate something, he became completely motionless, not the stillness of rest, but the focused attention of a hunter preparing to strike. This is impossible, Keth muttered. I am Vorthak. We are the apex predators of the galaxy. On your world, yes, Elena agreed. But Muffin evolved on a world where being the strongest wasn't enough. Earth's predators had to be smart, adaptable, and ruthlessly efficient. Size was often a disadvantage. As if to demonstrate the point, Muffin suddenly leaped from the floor to a high platform in a single fluid motion that seemed to defy physics. The jump was silent, precise, and suggested strength completely disproportionate to his size. Keth took an involuntary step backward. He can't actually hurt me, the Vorthak said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Can't he?" Elena asked. "Muffin weighs about 4 kilograms. You weigh nearly 300. But he's faster than your reflexes, smart enough to find weaknesses you don't know you have, and patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike." Muffin had found a perch where he could observe the entire facility. He settled into a crouch that looked relaxed, but kept his muscles coiled for instant action. His green eyes fixed on Razketh with the focused attention of someone studying a particularly interesting puzzle. "On Earth," Elena continued, "cats are responsible for the extinction of dozens of species. They hunt for sport, not just survival. And they're so efficient at it that humans have to actively manage their populations to protect other wildlife." Razketh realized he was being studied. Every movement he made was being catalogued and analyzed by the small creature. When he shifted his weight, Muffin's ears twitched with attention. When he turned his head, those green eyes tracked the movement with laser focus. He's hunting me," Razketh said, wonder and fear mixing in his voice. "Mentally, yes," Elena confirmed. "Muffin is figuring out your patterns, your weaknesses, your blind spots. If he wanted to hurt you, he already knows exactly how he'd do it." For the first time in his life, Razketh understood what it felt like to be prey. "But why doesn't he attack?" Elena walked over to Muffin and scratched behind his ears. The cat immediately began purring, a sound that made Razketh's exoskeleton vibrate with sympathetic frequency. "Because Muffin has learned something that your species never needed to: the difference between can and should." "I don't understand." "Muffin could probably find a way to seriously injure you if he wanted to. But he doesn't want to, because he's learned that cooperation gets better results than domination. He gets food, shelter, medical care, and entertainment without having to constantly fight for survival." Razketh stared at the small creature who was now enjoying Elena's attention. He chose to be less than apex. He chose to be smart instead of just strong.